pessoal, sejam todos bem-vindos. A gente vai começar. Primeiramente, eu gostaria de apresentar o professor Klaus. Ele tem atuado nesse mercado de gestão de resíduos há mais de 30 anos. É um dos ícones da Alemanha no que diz respeito ao desenvolvimento de uma gestão sustentável de resíduos. Inclusive, ele foi quem participou do primeiro projeto de coleta seletiva da Alemanha. Então, ele tem muito a contar em relação, principalmente, às biotecnologias. Essa apresentação ela acontece no âmbito do nosso projeto ProteGEEr. É um projeto internacional de uma cooperação entre o Brasil e a Alemanha. Diretamente relacionados estão os Ministérios de Desenvolvimento Regional e o Ministério de Meio Ambiente da Alemanha. Esse é um projeto de 5 anos que conta com a participação de instituições de excelência acadêmicas no Brasil, onde vocês podem ver nessa lâmina, e uma delas é a própria Federal do Ceará, onde o professor Ronaldo é o nosso interlocutor no que diz respeito a implementação dessas medidas de proteção e de beneficiamento das frações orgânicas e as demais frações presentes nos resíduos sólidos urbanos. Vocês podem ter maior acesso às informações sobre o nosso projeto a partir desses 2 sites que estão aí presentes, o próprio site do projeto ProteGEEr, como o site do Teach for Waste, que é onde a gente concentra todo o material didático para os cursos de pós-graduação com essa abordagem de uma gestão sustentável de resíduos. Então, professor Klaus, pode começar. Klaus, you can anfangen.
Okay. So, welcome everybody. When we talk about biotechnologies in waste management, I show you in this slide the different areas of technologies. It's one hand this aerobic process, the anaerobic process, and on the other hand, alcoholic fermentation. With the last one, we have no experience. You in Brazil have much more experience, but we use it. So this is the easy thing. The left part, aerobic processes, this is at the moment the most important technology and process and the most used in waste management. On one hand, it's recycling to produce high quality compost. And the second step, or the second technology, is treatment before landfilling with the background to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, the greenhouse gas methane. And the third area of this aerobic process is the aerobic drying. And I tried to give you information about these technologies, these 3 areas of technology today. And there is another one. It's, for example, the air purification by biofilter technology. I send you the presentation, but today we don't have the time. So the other part is a different microbiological process. It is the anaerobic process. And again, it is on one hand to produce biogas, and the second hand, also the treatment before landfilling. And so why biotechnologies are so important in the area of waste management. And I will give you some specific properties about biotechnology. On one hand, you can use it as large, you see here, and small technology, like the composting in your own garden or a small facility in agriculture area and huge one in more or less agriculture style, industrial style. That means you start with some kilograms and at the end, the biggest facilities I know from Dutch, it's around 800,000 tons a year. And we have these different areas also in the anaerobic process, in the biogas production process. You see here a very, very small anaerobic digestion plant. I know it from Vietnam, and a very simple technology in Germany. It's a technology. It's not so complex, and the high-tech technology. So we have all technology we use all over the world. Another point, and for me, it's a very, very important part. when you are in the area, when you are living in countries like development countries, threshold countries, or emerging countries, there is a very important question you have to ask and you have to answer. This is the question, employees. What's about working places? This is a technology also with composting, with a lot of people are working inside, and this is fully automatically. So when you have enough working places, this could be an option. But if not, this is a very important part, because this is one question you have to answer according to sustainability. Because one of this column of sustainability are the social aspects, nearby ecological and ecological aspects. So this is the consequence. You have very cheap technologies and very expensive technologies. So you can use it and implement it everywhere. Last picture. So because of this small and big and, it's possible that you can implement decentralized applications. That means, for example, compost facility 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you have only one equipment of technology, for example, shredder, screening, windrow turner, and. So it could be for a huge rural area a very interesting concept for your country or for your area. Don't be afraid of the next part. I will talk about a little bit. I'm absolutely sure only a little bit about microbiological fundamentals. And again, I have to say something about these names. That's me. That's Christiane. Andrea Pfeiffer is the responsible person in my university for this Teach for Waste. And this is Bruno Auca. It's a Brazilian student. He made his master last year in Braunschweig. So we start with some fundamentals. So microbiology means you have very small organisms. This is the first main point. And these are the oldest organisms we know. Around 3.5 billion years ago, they go out on our world. So some higher organisms we have since 750 million years. But what is the main important for microorganisms? They are on one hand ubiquitous, they are everywhere, they are omnipresent, and they are very adaptive. That means they could live by more or less 0 degree up to 135. From the pH value from 1 to, meanwhile we know some 1 to 14. And the high salt and pressure amplitude. So these are organisms, which is the most important thing, they are very adaptive. That means also very adaptive to this different kind of raw materials we have for the treatment of composting on one hand or for anaerobic digestion. Then we go now a little bit more in the performance of this kind of animals, or these are not animals, these bacteria. Here you see the performance, the degradation performance of bacteria and the growing of cells compared to animal cells. And there you see the huge difference. That means the performance of bacteria is factor some hundred more than any other cells. Another point you have to remember when we talk about the process of composting and the process of anaerobic digestion. Here you see the composition of bacteria, of microorganisms and bacteria. And you see they have a ratio of carbon 20, nitrogen 5, phosphorus 1. This is the composition more or less for a bacteria. But the same like human being, they eat what they are. That means the bacteria need more or less the same ratio in the raw material to have an optimal degradation process. So that means 20 to 5 to 1, this is the ratio we need in the raw material as an orientation. So we have to talk about enzymes. Why? without enzymes, it is not possible to have an efficient degradation of the products of photosynthesis. And the microorganisms use mainly, not only, but mainly biocatalysis. That means the enzymes reduce the half-time of reactions from 300 years to about 1 second. Then you can imagine what performance this enzyme has. So the main point is they reduce the energy with the activation energy with enzymes. So the bacteria don't have to climb up this mountain of energy. It's only a small mountain, so they can use their energy much more efficiently. So again, that means a reduction of time from 300 years to 1 second. Why I explain it? It's very simple. When I start with my career in composting it some 100 years ago, we all believe the composting process, it works very well when the temperature inside the compost windrows is very high. That means the higher the temperature, the better the efficiency. And this is absolutely nonsense. But the most of the literature says the same. The higher the temperature, 60 degrees, 70 degrees, 80 degrees, no problem, wonderful. And the most people in Germany believe in it, and in France and in Denmark and in. No, this is absolutely wrong, because when we talk about biocatalysts, then we talk about proteins. And proteins has, on the other side, a problem with temperature. So, at first, the activities of the proteins, enzymes, rise up more or less parallel to the rising of temperature. But there is a moment, there is a temperature level, we have the protein denaturation. It's more or less like the fever in our body. And then the activity of the enzymes collapsed. And this is in the area between 50 and 58 degrees. So if you want to have a high efficiency of degradation by using enzymes, this is the only way to have a high efficiency, then you have to enhance your process, to operate your process lower than 58 degrees. This is not every time very easy, but this must be the target of the process in composting, in the composting process. Okay, the next point, when we talk about microorganisms and microbial degradation, then we have to talk about what is photosynthesis. I don't want to explain it because everybody of you knows what is photosynthesis. This is the basement for all biomass production, and on the second hand, not the plant biomass production, also the following products of animals. All the biomass products are based on glucose, starch, proteins, fat, and cellulose. And also hemicellulose, lignin, and huminic substrates. But when you have this so-called loss of ignition, this is a kind of analysis where you more or less burn the sample. Then also the other organic components will be burned. That means plastic, rubber, and leather. And more or less at the origin, plastic is an organic component. It's oil-based or coal-based. The same rubber and leather. But these components are not available for microorganisms. And everybody of you have heard about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the problem of marine litter. Then also in this kind of analyze, we have carbonate and water of crystallization, but we have to fix our interest only in this part. That means the green and the white-blue area. These are the components who are available for microorganisms. And there is a differentiation. All of these organic components are degradable by aerobic microorganisms, by the composting process. Also, hemicellulose, lignin, and huminic substrates. And for the anaerobic process, that means the process where we produce biogas, the microorganism can only degrade the anaerobic microorganism, glucose, starch, protein, fats, and cellulose. So we call this the so-called biochemical omnipotence. That means all products created by the photosynthesis and also with the following products like animals and an ant are degradable by microorganisms. This is so-called biochemical omnipotence. And otherwise, if we don't have had this biochemical omnipotence, we have more or less a 40 meters high column on our Earth with organic components. And relevant for all this degradation are bacteria, actinomycetes, and fungi. And again, this biochemical omnipotence based on the aerobic process, that means with the use of oxygen. Sorry for these pictures, but if you want to go a little bit deeper in this area, you have to know a little bit about the different phases of composting. If you like, Christiane can present the description, the script of this lecture. It's meanwhile 350 pages, and then you can read about it. For me, I only want to explain you a little bit the last step number 4. This is a so-called respiration chain. In this area, the main demand on oxygen can gain from the microorganism, and otherwise the highest amount of energy in form of ATP can be generated. So, and there are some structure faults you have to learn. And this is, for example, the degradation process, the aerobic degradation. Oh, no. We have here glucose plus U2. The result is 6 carbon dioxides and 6 molecules of water. Sorry, you have to enter after the C6H12O6 plus O2. This is the main point. And sorry, I don't know why it's wrong. But what is very important, you have also a lot of heat, kind of ATP. So that means you have a lot of energy you release during the degradation process. And the microorganism can use a part of this energy to recreate the biomass. And this is very important for these two processes. The anaerobic one, the next one I want to explain. Again, the aerobic process has a degradation which runs exponentially. This is very important. At the beginning, when you have more or less the easily degradation components, you have a high performance, and at the end, the intensity decreases. We are now in the area of anaerobic process. That means biogas production. These are the components, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And in the first phase, we have the hydrolysis. You can describe it in a technical way like a shredding process. That means large molecules are shredded to very small ones, so that microorganisms can degrade the small ones. It's called the hydrolyze phase. The second is the acidification phase. It means there is the production of acids. The third one is the acidogenic phase, and the last one is the methanogenic phase, in which the microorganisms, the methanogenic microorganisms produced from H2 and carbon dioxide, methane, and from acidic acids. Here is a very important part. These two processes you can drive with oxygen and without. So the entire process, the entire anaerobic process, is partly aerobic and partly anaerobic. The third and the fourth phase is absolutely anaerobic process. So now this is right. So again, we have the same raw material. It is an idealistic kind of biomass. We have the production without oxygen. We have, as a result, carbon dioxide and methane, and only 2 ATP, a very low amount of energy. But, you know, in physics, we say there is no energy. It's not possible that you lost energy. So again, we have 36 ATP by the composting process and only 2 by the anaerobic process. This is the reason for the microorganism. When they could choose, they take the aerobic process, because this is much more better for gaining energy for the reproduction of the cell mass. So when we have an anaerobic process and you enter oxygen, immediately the anaerobic microorganism will die, because the microorganism group will change to aerobic process by using oxygen. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. No, again, the water. I don't know why we find in the literature only this structure. Normally, when you make an entire mass balance, you find it in the script. You have to add water. Without water, no chance to degrade materials. So the real formula is much more complicated, and you have to add nitrogen, you have to add sulfur, and. So, but this is a good way to explain this kind of faults. And the same, like in the aerobic process, we find a degradation which runs exponentially. So before we will talk a little bit about raw materials, I will present you a very simple result, an ecological result. We make a lot of ecological balances, and at the end, it is a very clear result. The cascade utilization, that means the combination of anaerobic process and post-treatment by composting process, is, from the view of ecological, is the best way for recycling of organic matters. So very important part. We start in Germany, for example, with the composting process, and since around 20 years, we start to add also the anaerobic process. And at the end, you will see why it's a question of technology development, but also a question of money. But I think at the end, I hope you know why this is so complicated to implement this cascade utilization. Cascade utilization means at first taking out the energy, and in the second step, producing fertilizers and soil conditioners. Now I will talk about 50 minutes about raw materials. And we have to discuss, or you have to discuss, at the moment it's not possible, we have to discuss later, what is the best solution for everyone. For example, taking a collection system with the entire municipal solid waste, or have we made a separate collection? Next slide. Okay, the main question is, do we need a separate collection in Germany, in Europe, worldwide, or not? And the problem is I can't give you a clear answer. But at the end, I think you will see where the problems are. So we start in Germany in the beginning of the 80s with a separate collection of the organic of the kitchen and garden waste in the green bin, and we have the remaining municipal solid waste in the gray bin. So main question and main requirement was to produce a better compost than in the history we had in Germany. You see here the red area. These are the limiting values for compost in the area of heavy metals. So, for example, lead, you have two values, 150 and 100. I have short to explain it. 100 milligram per kilogram dry matters if you use 20 tons every 3 years. But when you use only 30 tons every 3 years, this meant a lower amount. Then you have to fulfill a limiting value by 100. I think this is easily to understand. So, but where was the problem in Germany? We start with the composting, I think, at the beginning of the last century, and in the 70s, 1970s, we have around 70 facilities, and in the 80s, 0. What was the problem? The first problem, a lot of plastic, a lot of glass, and an end. But this was not the main problem. The main problem was the right side, the right column. Municipal solid compost in Germany, when you compare this heavy metal concentration, for example, lead, 598, or cadmium, very problematical heavy metal, 6.39, and mercury, 2.7. No chance to achieve these limiting values. This was the background when we start the separate collections of the bio-waste in Germany. And these are the results of separate collection. And you see, no problem to achieve this kind of limiting values. But you have to see it a little bit regionally, and you have to see it also a little bit from the historical point of view. So next picture will show you a little bit. You see here the German total waste compost. Again, this lead and an end. But now we have the German compost from 1980. But we have here some results from Spain and from France. And you see, when you compare it with the German numbers, because of the technology, of the pre-treatment and refining technology, we are able, in the past 40 years, to reduce the heavy metal concentration in a very intensive way. Sure, the heavy metal concentration from mixed waste are higher than from separate collected waste. But have it in your mind, this number, that we have a development in the direction of lower concentration of heavy metals. And you see another point. I show you here from the heavy metals from Germany in the bio-waste from 1989 to 2020. And you see this different kind of heavy metal concentration reduced by, for example, lead by 66%. and mercury 72. Background and reason for this reduction of heavy metals is the closing of sources of heavy metal emission. And the main emission are coming from wet deposits, that means from air emission, but also from fertilizers, for example, when we talk about cadmium. So we have to ask, do we have the same development in other countries? Then maybe in combination with better technologies, we can reduce the amount of heavy metals. And you hear a little bit that I look for a reason, don't do separate collection. And at the end, I hope you will understand why I try to explain it. This is a German bio-waste. This is normal. So now, you see on these pictures, plastic, metals, and. And this is reality. We have in the German bio-waste between 1 and 10% of components which are not bio-waste. So, and from this 1 to 10%, we have 57% plastics, we have 9% glass, 6% metals, and some others. So these contaminants in former time were not a problem. But now I will give you a number, you see it here on the top. In German compost, we found from 20 to 800 pieces per kilogram dry matter microplastic. And when you have this background, we have to think about separate collection or mixed waste compost. It's not only a question of heavy metals, it's meanwhile a question also cause of littering of plastic, particularly littering of microplastic. So this is so complicated to find a way to release the opportunity or give the opportunity to produce a mixed waste compost. So because of this problem with this high amount of pieces, of plastic pieces or microplastics in the compost, we change our law. That means the law said all these refining steps to get out the impurities we have to do before the composting process. Because in the composting process and in the shredding process, you shred the plastic and produce the micro compost. And at the moment, I don't see a way to find a solution to use a compost from mixed waste. But let's come to the other pictures, then you see why it is so important to find a way. This is not typical for Germany. This is only typical for some areas in some cities, but I think in many development countries, you have very huge cities with a lot of areas with a very high density of living areas. And the worst separation in Germany of bio-waste we find in these social, not easy structures in our cities. So we have a high amount of plastics, a high amount of impurities, and a very low amount of collecting rate. So forget what I said about the quality of separate collection. I will give you the newest information about German waste composition and came later on to international waste composition. We have in Germany the separate collection of bio-waste, but we have in our remaining municipal solid waste bin, we have 39% of bio-waste. This is a very high number, and this means the separate collection doesn't work very well in Germany. But what we also see is when you look how is the composition of the bio-waste. Then we see 10% of wood, 7% of packaged food. That means that we have in Germany every year 6.1 million tons of food in the waste only from households. We have also around 6 million tons of food. This is no waste of food from industry and from the trading. And this is a value of more or less 21 billion euro every year. And the first analysis we found from UK, they make the first analysis. And in Europe, the numbers are all more or less very similar. But what does it mean to composting in anaerobic digestion? That means very clear that this material, this 17%, is not for anaerobic digestion and not for composting. This material we have to avoid, because by avoiding this high amount of food waste, we could release in greenhouse gases, in energy and water production in a very huge amount. So, first point, to find a sustainable way for the bio-waste is avoidance. So, and again, when I said before, the separate collection is not so good we have in Germany with the bio-waste collection. You see here the collecting rate. We have 52% of bio-waste in our gray municipal solid waste bin. That means 48% we don't collect. When you compare this with paper and cardboard, it's 78, or when we talk about glass, 84. And when we see the next slide, you see, yes, we have this low degrees because we have some municipalities, we have only a collecting rate by 30%. But it is possible when you do it right, by a good PR work, by good education, by good controlling measures, then you can lift up the bio-waste collection up to 82, or paper and cardboard up to 92 or 96. So there is a very high potential for optimizing. And this is the development in Germany. We start in 1983, and I think we need more or less 15 years that the responsible politician said, okay, this is an idea we have to lift up and we have to implement in Germany. And now I think nobody discussed about the bio-waste collection, the separate collection. But at the end, we must say in Germany, by this very high amount of education activities and PR activities, the amount of collection rate is too low. Before we came to the composting process, let me give a short overview about anaerobic digestion. I've given also numbers from Germany, but I will give you some relation to other countries. This is the development of anaerobic technologies. We have more or less 10,000 facilities in Germany. 10,000. 95% of these facilities are not dealing with organic waste, they are dealing with agriculture waste and with special products, produced organic components from agriculture, not waste. But the main point is, was the background, and I showed at the next slide, what was the background that we started with anaerobic digestion. In 2000, we create a law, it's called Renewable Energy Act. And with this law, we financed as funding of anaerobic processes, of renewable processes. And one of the renewable processes is the biomass use and the production of biogas. And in 2015, we formulate a law that requires anaerobic digestion. So when you compare to the situation in many other countries, there's one very important point. First point, composting is much more cheaper than anaerobic digestion. And when you don't have a funding, it is more or less impossible to build such kind of technology. Otherwise, when there is a group of politicians said we want to have it and we pay more, okay. But normally, composting is much more cheaper. So the fundamental basement was built in the year 2000 with this new law, so that you don't get only, I will give you a relation, 6 euro cent for each kilowatt hour, you get the factor 4. That means up to 24 euro cent per 1 kilowatt hour. And this was the basement for starting with anaerobic digestion in the agriculture and later on in the waste management area. There we start more or less in 2000. That means otherwise, without supporting and funding anaerobic technology, I think you don't have a chance. Otherwise, if you have some laws which require this technology and say it's only allowed to build anaerobic digestion plants with composting, this could be another way, but normally it doesn't work. And this Renewable Energy Act was the best export idea we had in Germany in the law area. So meanwhile, all European country has a more or less similar Renewable Energy Act by supporting by supporting the production of renewable energy. This is not only biomass, this is also wind, this is also water, this is also geothermy and or solar technology. And you know, with this kind of Renewable Energy Act, we start in 2004 in Germany with 6% of renewable electricity. We are now by 50%. And you know, Germany was some years ago at the very beginning. And when I compared with Brazil, I think you have a renewable part, Christiane, corrigate me, about 90% because of your water electricity. Is this right? So this is the background. You need a financial funding if you want to implement also anaerobic digestion. And you see here at the end the results. We have in total 44 million tons in Germany, and we recycled by separate collection bio-waste 10 million tons. And also paper, packages, glass, and other components. You have now to ask the question. No, I will show you the two next one, and then I will ask this question. When you see this table, we are on the left side, Germany, in the middle, Brazil, Thailand, India, Java. And what you can see is the green lined numbers. German, 39.3% of bio-waste in the rest waste, in the remaining waste. China, 64. Brazil, 41. I can't believe, but these are the actual numbers. Thailand, 62. India, 75. Java, 78. That means the organic fraction, particularly in development and threshold countries, is much more higher than in industrial countries. And there's one point which is very important. Not the absolutely mass is different, the percentage is different. That means you have a basement of organic components in your waste, and by developing of industry and using packages, papers, cardboard, and all other components, particularly paper and plastic are rising. The organic matter normally will stay in the same amount. And what is very important for this composition, these are the consequences for the water content. And in combination with the water content and the low amount of plastics, of energy given components, the calorific value on the last line of many waste are very low. That means waste which not achieve minimum 6,000 kilojoule per kilogram are not burning themselves or itself. You need coal, you need gas, or you need oil. So you must pre-treat this material when you want to use it in an incineration plant. And so one point could be separate collection. This is one idea. And the other idea could be take out the organic components out of the waste, normally by a screening cut of 80 millimeters. And so you can get out the organic components, and the remaining components you can sort or you can burn. Or you can produce special RDF to use it in the cement facilities. So there are a lot of options. This shows you this development. This is mass concentration and the development in the mean income. With higher income, you have a rising of packages, and the percentage of organics decrease. The reality means the percentage, the absolutely mass of organic doesn't change, but the amount of plastics and packages are rising. So this is very important for your future prognosis of bio-waste components. And for example, we have done for a city in the state of Sao Paulo a prognosis from 2003 to 2014. We have a population growth of 11% or 12%, but we have an increase per capita of 24%, 24.4%. What does it mean? That means, on one hand, we have an increase of the population, and you know the increasing of population in Brazil is very high, but we also have a change of the absolutely amount of waste products, and this is a rising in the area of packages and in the area of newspapers and. So this is very important part. More or less the organic components are stable. Before I came to the end of the first part, you see here the different kind of developments you will have in your region. Population growth, depending there you have your numbers to use it for the prognosis. Glass, we have a reduction the next time very intensively, and we think about that in future will be not necessary to make a collection of glass because there's a changing from glass to PET. To PET. Paper cardboard, terrible. Corona gives support. The packaging, we have a very huge increase, but the print products are decreasing. Light packaging are rising, light packaging methods are decreasing. Food and garden waste, there is no change. And we have a huge problem of diapers. And now the last picture, and then we came to the different kind of processes. There's a prognosis in Germany from 2015 to 2024, and I think you will have it in a similar way in the most countries of the world. A minus of around 20% of glass, minus 20% of metals, plastic plus 30%, paper minus 30%, cardboard plus 30%. This is the new way of shopping. The online shopping is the main point by this development. And nappies. What happened with nappies? Why we have a plus of 30%? That's very easy. Not only me as a very old man, the Germans in general, in average, is a very old group of persons. I think the oldest community are the Japanese. So we said in Germany that in 8 years, the amount of nappies for old people has the same number like the nappies from the young. And this is the background for this rising. And the development we have in all countries. We are, after Japanese, I think, on the place 2, and Brazil is a very young country, but we have in all countries, also in China, the very similar development, only with some years different to the development here in Germany. So this is a big problem. Why? The component inside the nappy is biomass. And this biomass produces a lot of greenhouse gases. And when you bring it to landfills, we have the typical problems with landfill gas production and in end. So this is the background for this different kind of waste fractions and the background for doing some prognosis. So when we talk in Europe about waste management, we talk about climate change. And I will give you some information about climate change in the area of waste. The main problem is that in all statistics, the impacts of waste management are not correct. Background is that some areas, some reduction of greenhouse gases are not summed by the waste management. It's, for example, listen up in the area of energy or in the area of industry and. And I will give you some ideas about it. So generally we say that in threshold countries, development countries, the waste management area is responsible for up to 12% of greenhouse gases. Up to 12%. Today I talk only about the bio-waste. But when we may have the meeting in the next week, I will give you a lot of other ideas where we have the main reduction results. So this is again the number of Germany. But it's very easy to have a feeling for your own country. This is 1990. You know that all numbers we know about greenhouse gases, we based on the year 1990. So we have in Germany 38 million tons of greenhouse gases equivalent. That means all of the gases. It's not only carbon dioxide, but it's the equivalent of carbon dioxide. I think everybody of you knows what the equivalent is. So, and in the year 2019, we have only 9 million tons. But in all our statistics in Germany, in Europe, in the whole world, because of IPCC, we only consider the emission of greenhouse gases. For example, the emission of landfill, the emission of incineration facilities, the emission of recycling facilities, and. So, when you see where it comes from, it's landfilling. So you know that in Europe, we have forbidden landfilling of fresh waste. That means of waste which has high amount of organic matter and could be degraded on a landfill and produced methane emission. Landfilling 80%. When I would think about the numbers for Brazil, I want to give you an estimation. I would say in Brazil, it's around more than 90%. And because of the higher amount of organic components, I think you have very high emission from landfill. And you have to know, it's a very important part. We have very modern landfills in Germany with very huge effort for collecting gas and using gas in CHPs. But we collect the gas from the modern landfills are not higher than 30%. The background is, in the operation phase, the most of methane is produced. And later on, you cover your landfill and implement your sucking systems and. So the best landfills are not able to collect more or less than 30% or maximum 40% of greenhouse gases. And again, when we look at this picture, it's again this group, this green group, glucose, starch, protein, fat, and cellulose. Not hemicellulose, lignin. That means not wood, because wood is not degradable for anaerobic microorganisms. We have in our remaining waste, bio-waste, we have the full nappies, the paper, the sewage sludge. Sewage sludge has a lot of potential for greenhouse gases. And so it is very important to discuss the situation of separate collection or the mixed waste treatment. And I think when we finish today, we have to discuss it, because I think when we want to find in a short time, it's if possible, a very high reduction of greenhouse gases from landfill. And I think it is not possible to implement separate collection systems. You need 10 to 15 years. We need 15 to 20 years. But when I think about bio-waste in Brazil or in other warm countries, it is not possible that you collect it like us all 14 days. You have to collect it every day. I'm absolutely sure this is more or less impossible. So this is for me a main argument to say to find a rapid solution, and this is only possible if we make a remaining waste treatment before landfill by using incineration or by using mechanical biological treatment. But let's come back to this idea, emission of greenhouse gases. And on the other side, we have not only emission from landfill, emission from incineration facility, we also have credits. That means the total balance of carbon dioxide is the emission minus the emission credits. I will explain you what does it mean, credits. But you see here in Germany, we have a reduction by 29 million tons of greenhouse gases by closing landfills, more or less. But we gain 30 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents by credits. That means every person up to now, 0.72 tons carbon dioxide equivalents per person. What are the credits? This is, I think, a very important part, and you have to understand it before we looking for bio-waste and similar components. For example, if you make recycling for paper, you save a lot on using secondary resources. That means you save a lot of energy. And by saving a lot of energy, you reduce the emission of greenhouse gas, of carbon dioxide equivalents. But the balancing system said, these credits, we don't take it for the waste management sector, we use it or we bring it to the energy sector. And this is the background why all the activities in the waste management area by recycling or by avoidance, we don't get these credits. And I know that in Brazil, the people very often discuss about that, oh, waste management is not so important. Here you see the importance of waste management when you add the credits by saving the energy or saving to the gaining of raw products. For all these products, you need energy. And by saving energy, you save the greenhouse gas equivalents you produce by producing energy. And when you have, for example, a country like Brazil, it is not so much because your carbon dioxide factor is lower than in Germany. But when you look for China, or you look for India, or you look for Australia, you have a very high carbon dioxide factor. So this background you have to know when we talk about waste management and climate change. Recycling of bio-waste, that we have at first the biogas utilization and the compost use. And I will explain you by the climate balance why this is so important. In this table, you see greenhouse gas emissions and greenhouse gas credits for the recycling area of bio-waste, only for the recycling area of bio-waste. So we have greenhouse gas emission by the collection. For example, in our bins, we have a little bit of production of methane in the summertime. I'm absolutely sure in these warm countries like Brazil or other countries, the methane emission factor could be very high when you have it collecting rhythm all 4 days, 6 days, 8 days. This is not impossible. We collect in Germany every week in the summertime and every 14 days in the wintertime. But we have a methane production in the collecting bin, if you have collecting bins. Then the transport of the bio-waste to the facilities. But we say in this case, no, we don't consider this, because we say otherwise we have to transport more of the entire waste, of the mixed waste. Energy consumption of the treatment process. You have to recognize and you have to consider the energy consumption of the treatment process by recognizing the carbon dioxide factor of the use of the mixed electricity factor. And again, have in your mind, in Germany, we have a factor of 440 at the moment, and you have a factor around 100. So you save not so much greenhouse gases like in Germany. Transport of compost products to the farmland and compost application. So where we have this greenhouse gas credits, energy supply, that means we produce energy by biogas. Nutrient supply. Why nutrient supply? You know that we produce, when we make this compost, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium. These nutrients, you balance the amount of energy to produce it. And this energy you save by using this material in the application in the agriculture area. But now there comes a very important part. Humus C supply. What is it? You know, the main value of compost is on one hand the organic matter, and on the other hand the nutrients. But nutrients are around 5%, 6% of the dry matter in the compost. Humus C is around 30 to 50%. This is the background for soil conditioner. And soil conditioner has the target to increase the humus concentration of the soil. And when you try to find numbers for humus C supply, you have to look of the different kind of soil providing technologies. For example, you have a special kind of green seed and to lift up the humus concentration. This is a very important part in our balancing. Indirect, you have to consider the mitigation of landfill greenhouse gas emissions through recycling measures for bio and green waste, when this material is not entering or disposed on landfills. All these 4 points are the credits, and these are the points of emissions. And now I will give you some ideas about numbers. Energy consumption, intensive composting. That means a compost facility intensive with high amount of aeration, with enclosed of all process areas and that. So we have the amount of kilogram carbon dioxide equivalent per ton bio-waste. There are a lot of opportunities and programs where you can do these balances. Biological treatment process 49, that means the emission from the facility. And the emission from facilities not relevant is carbon dioxide. You know, this is by IPCC, the consequence that we say carbon dioxide produced by biological process from biomass is not relevant. But when you don't have a controlled process, then it's possible that you produce methane. All composting process produce methane. Why? The problem is, in most cases, particularly without aeration, it is not possible to secure that all areas in the compost piles are on aerobic situation. You have partly in every time you have also methane situation, anaerobic situation in your pile. And if you have special raw materials, also raw materials after digestion, you have a little bit amount of laughing gas. And you know the problem when you have carbon dioxide, when you have methane, and when you have laughing gas. Carbon dioxide, you know, the global warming potential is 1. Methane is 28, and laughing gas is 300. Factor 300 higher potential of climate change. And so laughing gas is a very important part. So at the end, we have these 2 points of greenhouse gas emissions from the process. On the other side, you have the nutrient supply, the humus supply, and energy supply, energy recovery of residue from the processing. This is not so important. So when you take out wood and such kind of components, you can burn it and you will get a credit. So at the end, we have a plus, or normally in these balances, we named it a minus of kilogram carbon dioxide equivalent per ton of bio-waste. 143. It's not so much when you think by recycling of paper you get 1 ton or 1 ton 50. So it's more or less a low degree. Here we have the situation with integrating a fermentation step before the composting. So we have more or less the same situation, energy consumption, we have biological treatment processes, and so we have a little bit more of emission, cause when you have the anaerobic digestion and the post-composting, you have a lot of methane and laughing gas emission. So the emission is higher. On the other side, we have more or less 200 kilograms of credits only by producing biogas. So this is a net balance. That means all the energy we need, we have integrated in this part. So at the end, we can reduce the amount of greenhouse gases only by the process and by the use and by the supply of these values like nutrients, humus B, and biogas. So this shows very clear the combination system, the cascade system is better than the simple composting process. Here you see again the same situation. This is the intensive composting. This is a simple composting without high energy demand, and this is the anaerobic digestion. So again, this 300 kilograms of carbon dioxide as a kind of credit. And here you see very clear where are the relevant emission factors. These are the emission, and in this area, the energy supply with biogas. So for Brazil and all other countries who has not the requirement of separate collection of biowaste and pre-treatment before landfill, you have also add these numbers of credits on the left side in Europe, the credits from the recycling process and the reduction of the organic matter from the landfill, and indirect the reduction of the methane production and methane emission. So in total, you have 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent credits and emission reduction. When we look now for a country like Brazil, we have talked about that the organic matter is higher, percentage of organic matter is higher. So this is the background, that on one hand, we produce more biogas by the recycling process, but otherwise we avoid a lot of methane by taking out the organic matter from landfill. And in this case, we are on the same level of recycling of paper end to end. So we are around 1.8 tons of greenhouse gas reduction only by recycling of biowaste and taking biowaste away from landfill. And now you have to balance in your area, in your country, the entire amount of organics from waste, the entire organics from households, from industry, from agriculture, partly from the agriculture industry, and also from the wastewater treatment. Then you have a feeling about the amount of the reduction of greenhouse gases by the area of waste management. It is when you compare the numbers of IPPC, normally the double, because on one hand we have the emission reduction and on the other hand the credits, and in the most countries we have more or less factor 2 higher, and then you came in the area of this 10%, 12%. 20 years ago we had in Germany 5% of IPPC greenhouse gas emissions, because we only add the emission and not the credits. In combination with the credits, we would be in the area of 10%. 10% in Germany 20 years ago. So what are the goals for the future? We're talking a lot about minimizing volume and mass of waste delivered to landfill. This is, in my opinion, at the moment, particularly in the outside area of Europe, but there are many countries in Europe, particularly the eastern countries, we have similar situation with landfills. So we need an inactivating of the biological and chemical process, mainly the microbiological process of anaerobic degradation. So you can do it by MBT, and I will explain you this MBT technology in the next week. And I will explain also the compost and the digestion facility. You can reduce the gas production by MBT with a special kind of biofilter, the methane oxidation filter, by around 90%. And sure, when you use an incineration facility, you can reduce it by 95, 98%. No question. So these are the technology to find a way in a short time to reduce a high amount of methane emission. And I'm absolutely sure, because you recognize that we in Europe collapsed in discussing about climate change and how to change it, that we have this climate change. And we have now the election in the autumn, and every party will reduce more and more and more. Now we have the target, for example, in Germany, 60% up to 2030. I have no idea how we can do it, but that means, on the other hand, we take money. And when we think about these ideas, we must change our situation worldwide in a short time, not in 30 years and 40 years. This 30, 40 years, you need the time for separate collection and. So we need a solution in shorter time. So what can we do? When you cumulated the greenhouse gas emission of the last 40 years, then you will see North America and Europe produced more or less 90% of all greenhouse gas, cumulated over the last 40 to 50 years. So North America and Europe are responsible for climate change. And now China is doing its best to come in the same level. With increasing numbers, they are horrible. So, but on the other hand, I think all these trading ideas we have, so that we can take money from Western world, going in development countries, threshold countries, and in collaboration projects, we reduce climate emission abroad. This could be a very good chance. You know, the clean development mechanism, this was one of the idea in the European Union in the 19th years. So I'm sure that we will rise up this idea again, and you will see it. And this is the last point I will talk about. The European Union has a number, I think, of 50 billion euro for supporting countries in climate, in protecting climate in their country. So I'm absolutely sure that there will come money, because we are responsible, there will come money to enhanced process of climate protection. And you see it also when you see at the trading market, what is the price for 1 ton of carbon dioxide? In the last years, we named €1, €2, €5. Then at the beginning of this year, €20. Now we are in the area of €60. That means all our energy area, they have to pay for all the fossil energy €60 for their carbon dioxide emission. And in Germany, we have additional pricing of carbon dioxide emission. And so this is the background, that we can buy a loans in other countries by helping them to reduce climate gas emission. And this is, I think, a very big chance for us, for the future, particularly for you, to be active in the area of climate protection. Please have in your mind, in your head, the amount of organic components in a waste. You take these organic components and compost it over the time of 2 months, 3 months. So you can degrade the organic matter by around 60 to sometimes 70%. So that means from this normally 200 liter per kilogram or 200 cubic meter carbon dioxide equivalent we have in 1 ton of waste from landfill, we can reduce it by around 80%. There is another technology. We produced a compost product by composting. But this product is not a compost we use in agriculture. This product we dispose on landfills. But this is a material, it's similar to a biofilter material. So you cover your landfill, and with the covering of the landfill by around 1 meter thickness, you have a surface layer which is working like a biofilter. And this biofilter we called methane oxidation layer or methane oxidation biofilter or methane oxidation filter technology. It's a biofilter technology. And when you have a low amount of gas from the MPT material from the landfill, then again, 90% of this material you can oxidize by microorganisms, by the aerobic degradation process. It's not nothing else than a composting process. And so this MPT process can reduce the entire amount of the methane potential by around 90%. We will see it in the next, when we have our next lecture, then I explain this technology a little bit more in detail. Okay, so I think this was the last one.